about structure.
Like the love of the structure of life.
Yeah, I remember. Thanks, Hoy. Hoy always comes back, man. He saves the day. Thanks, Hoy. So fundamentally, the mind is kind of like this. It's kind of married to structure, right? And your heart is kind of married to your soul and to the divine. And because your mind is married to structure, it starts creating havoc when those structures start to crumble. Because the thing about structure that's fundamental is it's mortal. All structure is mortal. Every structure is mortal. And so it's going to eventually completely recycle. And it's going to crumble. And so there are two situations that cause us pain and suffering in life. It's whether the structures become oppressive, right? And it's kind of feeling like it's making us do stuff we don't want to do, that's not in our alignment, not with our purpose, right? But we kind of keep doing it because we're not in our heart, we're not empowered enough to follow our purpose, right? We're in fear of scarcity or whatever, right? So there's that issue where it's oppressive, and then there's the other issue where the structure's breaking down, and our mind's attached to it, like, no, I'm losing everything, or I'm losing whatever. So structure's here to serve us. So what I challenge everybody here to do is evaluate the structures in your life. I mean, are they serving you? If not, it's time to let go, time to recycle. And watch your ego fight it. And what is the ego? The ego is just this mind-generated mechanism. It's not real. The mind generates the ego, by the way. And it's a mind-generated mechanism to protect its own investments in structure. That's right. That's what the ego is. It's the mind's own generated mechanism to protect the mind's investments in structure. That structure could be anything. It could be a physical structure, an ideological structure, some concept. It could even be an identity. All identities are structures. And that's actually the most insidious structure is identity. Yeah. What happens with identities is they end up they attempt to replace your real power, your real love. And so your ego will constantly try and empower your identities because your ego gets invested in those identities, and then it'll do everything to support and defend those identities. Mm-hmm. Whether those identities are positive or negative. I mean, the identities could be anything. It could be like, oh, I'm a great fireman. Or it could be like, oh, I'm a murderer. It could be any type of identity. But the ego gets attached to it. And that's the danger. Is look at those identities, and are they serving you? If they're not serving you, it's time to flush them, because it's not who you are. The identities are not who you are. Remember what I said at the beginning, love is who you are. If you don't remember anything I said tonight, remember the one thing, love is who you are. So that's a key thing to always, when you're evaluating the structures in your life, the most important structures to evaluate in your life are your own identities. And say like, wow, it's like it's time to flush all these identities, and realize your own worth, it has nothing to do with identities. Your own power has nothing to do with your identities. Your own worth has nothing to do with identities. Who you are, what your purpose is, all of this has nothing to do with your identities. Your immortality has nothing to do with your identities. See, there was a point at which you did not exist as a soul. There was a point in time where your love was just one with God. Your love was God. It was just one with all of God. But at one point in time, God birthed your love. It's like a ray of love. Your whole soul is like this giant ray of love. And your soul was birthed. And at that point in time, forward, your love will never cease to exist in the universe. So your love is immortal. So you are immortal on the most fundamental level. After this life, your love will go off and do other things. amongst your loved ones. And, I mean, in fact, everything you take after this life is everything you've loved and all the love that's been given to you. That's what's that. You know, when it says in the Bible, like, build up your treasures in heaven, that's what it means. Right? It means that, you know, what your worth is your love. Everything your love can bring forth, all the things that you've loved, all the people who've loved you, that is your treasure. That is you. That is who you are. And that's what you're going to take with you. And that's what you should focus on. You know? And people get mixed up reversed. They think that instead of focusing on that being of their love, in this world we're born, we think, okay, we have to have something in order to do something, in order to be something. But it's the opposite. You're supposed to be first your love. From your love will come your actions, and from your actions will come your wealth and what you have. But it doesn't even matter if all your wealth is lost, because you're still your love. It doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter if you can't even do the actions anymore. You're still your love. But if you go about the other way, and you're disconnected from your love, and you think, oh, I've got to have first in order to be able to do something, in order to be something, it really messes you up. Because you're always serving it. What do you serve? See, instead of serving your own love, who you are, you're serving some havingness, some asset, something. You're serving some physical structure. And then you're depending on that structure to do something. And then you're doing that thing to basically be something. But guess what? It's not being love. You're being some identity. You're being some image. So you end up having something to leverage that having something into being able to do something. And that doing, typically, you're not even supposed to be doing it because you're not good at it because it didn't come from your love. You see what I'm saying? It didn't come from your love. So you're doing something you're not even good at. But because of the havingness or the wealth or whatever it is, you inherited something or whatever, you can leverage that to be able to do something. And then from that doing this, you take that energy and try and project it as some image, that this is who I am. And and the problem with that whole thing is you're never happy or content. One thing is because you never can have enough. You can never have enough to be. It becomes this mirage on the highway that just never leads you home. It's just like, you know, you're not going to find your love doing that. So that's a huge thing. Now, I want to say one other thing about relationships and living in the heart, and especially around forgiveness. Because a lot of people have issues with relationships, and ultimately, it's, you know, a lot of the love, you know, that is coming forth is going to end up in this world through relationships and in community and with friends and as friends, and typically there'll be always conflicts. And why is that? Why are there always conflicts? Well, you know, a lot of reasons is because we're living our minds to begin with, right? So that causes judgments. That's what the mind is. Ultimately, because the mind has no power and higher intelligence, it just typically judges. And that judgment causes separation. A separation causes conflict and pain. Okay? But why do we really have conflict on a really more fundamental basis? Besides just being in our mind and having judgments and it causes conflict, and I get all that. The reason is because we're here actually to have conflict. That may sound weird. That may sound weird. It's like, what? We're here to have conflict? What does that mean? Well, what it means is that we, for whatever reason, as our ray of love has been going through existence, we've decided to incarnate on this planet, which is a three-dimensional structural dimension with, you know, structures all around us. And so we decide to have an experience of structure. Because a lot of the beings in other dimensions, they're not playing around with structures. They're structureless. They don't need, for whatever reason, they don't need the experience of having structures in their lives. So we incarnate to have this structure and to experience the structure, and so we end up the structure itself is the reason we're having the conflicts. I'll give you an example. Say if you have a child, and it's like a little baby, or like a little 2-year-old, or 1-year-old, and all of a sudden it falls and bumps its head on the couch or something, and it starts crying. Well, it just had a conflict with the couch. You see what I'm saying? It just had a conflict with that physical structure. And then it moves beyond that. It eventually figures out how to manage that structure of the couch. And eventually it gets older, and it has other conflicts with other structures. Like, for instance, the parents have some rules that, you got to go to bed now. And the kid's like, no, I don't want to go to bed. But the parent has a structural rule that, no, now's the time, it's the right time to go to bed. So then you have all this conflict around bedtime. Another structure. Right? And then you move on in life, and you're in school, and your friends aren't being friendly for whatever reason. And so now, all of a sudden, you are having a conflict with your friends from some social dynamic or some judgment or whatever. And then you move on, and you get into love relationships. And then, there's other conflicts, and all of a sudden there's, break up, or you're jealous, or whatever's going on. And there's all these conflicts of those structures, these kind of relationship structures. And then you move on, and you're in the workplace, and all of a sudden your boss says you've got to do this, and you don't want to do it. So there's another structure that you're in conflict with, and you move on. And then you're in conflict with some sort of law of the land. You're speeding. You got busted. You have to pay a ticket. You're in pain. Again, you come into conflict with some structure. Right? You move on. It's like, okay, now we have a political conflict. Then a war, ideological, religious conflicts. Right? These are all structures. They're all structural conflicts. So what happens is, after you've had enough of these conflicts with structure, hopefully, you've gained enough in consciousness, and you've gained enough in faith to move beyond the need to even experience conflict. But it takes that crucible to develop the consciousness and the faith to be able to move beyond all the conflict. But eventually, you move beyond all the conflict. And by the way, like the alien technologies that are out there, the ones that are really advanced, they can travel faster than the speed of light, or cross the galaxy, which is all that technology is based on the fact that these aliens have moved beyond conflict. Conflict is not even a consciousness anymore, because if you have conflict in your consciousness, you can't even develop the necessary technologies to do that, to traverse those distances. Impossible. We'll never get beyond the solar system, ever, until we are way more advanced in our consciousness, where conflict's not even in our consciousness anymore. And we're developing literally technologies based on what? Based on primal magnetism. So getting back to relationships, the thing is that because you understand now the three parts of the universe, love, the adamantine particles, and one spirit, okay, that's the fundamental. Everything when you walk out this door, you can look at everything and realize that it's built out of those three things. The adamantine particles are real key in relationship, because what happens is when you get in a love relationship, remember, love commands the adamantine particles, right? So when you get into any sort of relationship, there's an exchange of the free-flowing adamantine particles. There's a lot of exchange of adamantine particles between you and another person, okay? And if some sort of conflict arises, as we know that we're all going to experience conflict, right? The whole key is forgiveness. The whole key is forgiveness. Remember, forgiveness I talked about earlier is super huge, because forgiveness is the only thing. See, if you don't forgive, let me back up. If you don't forgive, and you're just, the resentments are building, and the conflict is building more, and the anger, and everything is going on, and then you part your ways. Remember I said time doesn't heal anything. Remember, time's nothing. Time doesn't even exist. It's just an arbitrary measurement of a change in structure. That doesn't mean anything. Love is the only thing that heals. And the thing is, there's no panacea for healing. Okay, so when there's an instruction of love, the only thing you can do is go back to that instruction of love, and with love, heal it. Most of the time, that's through forgiveness. So the thing is, when you part and you haven't forgiven, and there's all this animosity, those adamantine particles that you exchanged, they're held in hostage. You're a martial artist, you know. So you know, what do they do in martial arts, right? Especially in Qigong, right? You're looking to all the qi that you've expended in your life, right? Right? It's all out there through whatever, resentments, angers, or other things that happened. You wasted your qi, you wasted your qi and it's blown out all over the place. And now you're doing meditation techniques to bring it all back in, right? You want to bring all that qi back into you, right? All those adamantine particles back. Remember, love commands the adamantine particles. So you can, any of the adamantine particles that you brought in through your love and through this life, you can call back into you. So the challenge is, you can't if you haven't forgiven, because the other person has those adamantine particles hostage. That's right. They have your adamantine particles hostage. You can't get them back. That's why, I mean, you look at all religions in the whole planet, and one of the highest things, in fact, there's ceremony. Look at, especially like, I know personally, because I come from a background of Judaism. In Judaism, the highest holy holiday of all of Judaism is Yom Kippur. What is Yom Kippur? Yom Kippur is a day of atonement. That's a day where you go and ask your friends, relatives, brother, sister, whoever you wronged or did, you ask them for forgiveness to make amends. Because that's the only way you're going to become whole. So that's the whole key in any relationship, is just always be willing, first and foremost, to forgive if there's any issues or conflicts, because otherwise, time will never heal it. So the forgiveness is key. To release those. When you forgive, those particles held hostage are released. They're released, and they go back. Does anybody have any questions? Because I think I'm running out of energy. Yeah, what?
Okay, you said that there's some giant collider in Europe where they're trying to discover this adamantine particle.
That it's called the Hadron Super Collider.
Okay, so if they actually haven't discovered it, how do we know that it's in existence?
That's great. We only know, and by the way, that particle is unique in that it's generic. So everything, even electrons, are built up out of these particles. The physicists don't know. From their perspective, they don't know. From all their theories, they say it exists, but they don't know. That's why they're building. That's why they built this thing. I mean, the thing's huge. In fact, they were building it in Texas back in the early '90s. They were building this giant super collider in Texas to do this exact same thing, and the funding got canceled. Yeah, the funding got canceled, and so and so after that whole thing got canceled, basically Europe picked up the balls, and Europe decided to run with it, and they basically the European Union, decided I think pull all the funds to build it, because the thing's huge, and it's who knows how many billions it took to build, But good point. They don't know. If you go online and Google like hadron and Google Higgs boson particle, or just Higgs particle, or the God particle. Interestingly enough, they call it the God particle. You'll find all kinds of discussions in literature, and they're hopeful, but they don't really know. So, yeah.
That everything you're talking about with like identity is something I've always dealt with, going through different factions of life, martial arts. There's major identity attachments, like different, Japanese, Chinese, Korean, there's constant in-house wars, different philosophical wars, and like different the whole deal. So I went through that whole like it's all identity. It's like he said, it's really, when you break it all down, it's really just like holding on to identity. And now that I'm so deep into the nutrition world, it's so funny when I see it play out. And like being in the raw food world for so long, I'm seeing it now, and I'm so happy that I see it like while I'm young. And so I get wrapped up into it sometimes. I see like everyone's kind of attached to some identity, like, oh no, you have to be this way. And if someone steps out of that and they start to question that, then like you get this whole mass upheaval of people who are just like, oh no, there's like almost like a witch hunt type of mentality that goes on because you had an egg or some weird thing. But anyway, so it's like it's all identity, it's all mind.
Yeah. The thing is about the mind is great at judging.
It's all judgment.
It's all judgment. That's right.
It's nothing to do with like the heart. Because once we get into our heart, like once I got really deeply more into my heart, I started to realize that it didn't actually matter. Like, for me, like for example, being a vegetarian or whatever, that's actually my own belief system. That's my own preference. That doesn't actually have to do with anything anyone else believes. And that's completely my own trip. And it's funny when I realize that I get more into my heart, I start to come more into that space, and I start to become like more real with people. I'm not sitting here talking to you, and it's like, okay, I'm not analyzing, I'm not criticizing. I'm just like, okay, just being here with that person, trying to find out what or not find out, but just try to experience like that person in that space, regardless of all these other kind of like particles that are involved in the experience, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, the whole key is to be heart-centered. As long as you can be as heart-centered as possible, or completely heart-centered, you'll stay out of judgment. Judgment is actually the only sin that a child of God is even capable of.
That created the whole like list of sins and rules.
There's like really no other even sin. I mean, the only real sin is judgment, actually. And in the Bible, what Judgment Day is the day that judgment judges itself. And that's when everybody returns to their heart. It's on that day, because judgment basically judges itself, and that's the end of judgment. So it's not really, basically put it this way, it's not the mind's realm to determine what is right and wrong. Now that might sound strange, but it's actually true. Because when the mind attempts to determine what is right and what's wrong, it's only going to judge. It's only going to judge. Even sometimes when we try to do kindness to somebody, like somebody's like, they just had a death in the family, and you're wanting to be good, and your mind takes over and like, gives them a gift or does something for them, and it's not coming from the heart. A lot of times that can be a judgment to that person. You don't know how they're taking it. And so it's a lot of times you're projecting your own guilt. You're projecting your own issues or your own ideas or ideologies or preconceived ideas on that person. Where really maybe all they just need is your company.
Right.
So that's the thing. When the mind gets involved with determining what's right and wrong, or right action or wrong action, all this, it will typically always fail, and it'll fail by judging, and by judging, all you're doing is creating further separation. Judgment is separation, and there's no such thing as separation. So really, what ends up happening is you're creating more and more illusion. That's right. Because the universe is whole. The one spirit's whole. There's no way you can divide the spirit. You can't cut it up. And typically what happens is, because we're not connected with love as who we are, we're always trying to do love externally by doing love. Or, you know what I'm saying? And as soon as you do that, what ends up happening is you get into this weird riddle of how do I do unconditional love? Because life has conditions to it. Structure has conditions to it. Right? Life is involved with structure. It has conditions. So if my friend is completely broke and has to go to the hospital, you know, sure, you know, I love him and I may give him $100 or even let him borrow my car, but am I supposed to turn over the deed of my house? Where does it end? Right? Love, so it always has conditions to it. So, but the thing is, and that's where the riddle is, when we put love externally, when we think it's an external commodity, when we think love is a commodity, you get trapped in this thing. Well, there's no such thing as unconditional love. Or if there's unconditional love, where does it end?
Yeah.
Or it's like, you know, I don't want to be an unconditional doormat.
That's where people...
Right? It's like, what do I do? Right? Well, the riddle is solved by realizing that love is who you are. And so that's the whole thing about, you know, being in the world, but not of the world. Where you can be love, and you can still be in this world. Right? But you don't have to really necessarily do anything. You know, it's not... So that's the kind of tricky thing. That's where the mind gets involved and tries to do acts of love, and in many cases it's just acts of judgment based on your own projections, your own, what you think is right, what the mind thinks is right and wrong. So the whole key where you determine what's right and wrong is in your heart. And that's where the higher intelligence of the heart has these 7 layers of intelligence. The first one being unity. Unity is the core intelligence of the Sacred Heart, and layered on top of that is the intelligence of love, and on top of that's the intelligence of life, and on top of that's the intelligence of respect, on top of that's the intelligence of honesty, on top of that's the intelligence of justice, and on top of that's the intelligence of kindness. And so what happens is if you're operating from the heart is always, any situation that you bring to the heart immediately applies all those intelligences to it. And immediately comes back with a feeling on what's right and wrong. You see what I'm saying? Immediately the heart will say, oh, that just feels right, or that feels wrong, based on these intelligences. Your heart is your higher intelligence, not your mind, not even close. And not only are those higher intelligences built in, but they're connected with your own unique covenant, your own purpose, your own covenants with the Creator, with your own soul. So they're in alignment with, so when you bring a situation in your heart, it applies those intelligences, and it applies it in relationship to your own covenant too, on who you are as that unique love frequency. The mind can't even do that. It's not built for that. It's like remember, the mind's a computer. The mind's a computer, and the first thing you want to do to learn to do with your mind is not figure out what's right and wrong or judge. Is learning how to unplug your mind. That's the first thing you need to do. The first thing you need to do with your mind is learn how to unplug it. Be in your heart for a while. Then you can plug your mind in and say, okay, listen to your heart. There's some other things that I didn't mention that you can do to empower the Sacred Heart. One is vegetarianism. One is especially raw food veganism, because the thing is that remember what I said, the Sacred Heart is your portal of all your love, and that love manifests as primal magnetism. So anything with water, anything high water content, like high water content foods, salads, vegetables, fruits, alchemically water is associated with magnetism. And so the more water you consume, the more it actually supports the primal magnetism of the Sacred Heart. So that's one thing that's why when a lot of people get into raw veganism, they have a spiritual awakening. Because it's like, whoa, it's because like, geez, all of a sudden, all the electrical charge that has been built up too much by eating too many animal products is released, and now they're supporting the natural primal magnetism of the Sacred Heart through all this water. They're consuming water through all the fruits and vegetables. So that's a huge way to actually empower the Sacred Heart, by the way, is eat less meat. And, if you're ready for it, you can go vegetarian. If you're not ready for it, that's fine too. But if you overconsume meat, what happens is meat's not a bad thing. Meat brings a lot of electrical charge in your body, and the electrical charge is good for certain ways, especially when it comes to certain muscular skeletal stuff.
Yeah.
Electrical charge is really good.
It's like neuroprotective.
So the animal products are beneficial from that perspective. But the thing is, when you bring in too much, you basically put too much electrical charge on the Sacred Heart. And when you put too much electrical charge on it, it suppresses the sensitivity of the Sacred Heart. It becomes more difficult for you to be in your heart because your heart is less empowered from an actual physics perspective. So that's another thing that you can do to empower your sacred. Another huge thing that you can do to empower your Sacred Heart is sun gaze. If you in the morning, in the evening, if you sun gaze, that's a huge thing, because sun gazing. There are a lot of reasons why it empowers your Sacred Heart, but it'll empower your whole endocrine system. So sun gazing empowers your whole endocrine system. It actually brings in all the energies of the trace minerals. So sun gazing can bring in, if you're deficient in any trace minerals, it's really the energy frequency of the trace minerals that are key, and the sun gazing can bring those energy frequencies in and supply you with any trace mineral deficiencies to compensate for it. And it builds up your immune system. But most importantly, the sun is the biggest magnetic vortex in our solar system. So what ends up happening is as you sun gaze just in the morning, just when it's kind of coming over the horizon, and just you don't want to damage your eyes, but just when you do that, the magnetic vortex of the sun, and not only that, you focus on just the infinity of the sun and just the infinity of everything, it'll resonate with the magnetic vortex of your Sacred Heart. And so that's another way to empower your Sacred Heart. A lot of indigenous peoples and just peoples throughout history have done sun gazing as a daily practice. It's really healthy, really healthy, and it's spiritually healthy. So that's another thing that's really good to do.
What about the moon?
Can't hurt it.
It's so big tonight.
Oh yeah, full moon. I mean, there's some people have theories that the moon is somehow can draw energy away from you, but I don't personally believe in those.
What did people do in native times when they didn't have lights and fluorescence and all that kind of stuff? That was how they knew that whatever the change would happen. What would they do? They would look at the solar system and
I think the moon's great.
I think there's a certain, for me personally anyways, when I'm out at night, and there's a certain kind of connection with the moon and with just the whole lighting of when it's dark, the stars, and there's something there. I don't know what it is.
Yeah,
there's definitely something.
Lots of energy coming from the
Lots of
hitting us, man. Lots of energy.
I recently read about a birth control or fertility method using the moon, lunaception, which was pioneered in the 70s by this woman, who figured out that you're most fertile during full moon, and because of our houses and artificial lighting, whatever, we don't have that access every time to that lighting. So she figured out if you just have a light in your room, like a 40 kilowatt light bulb, around the time of the full moon, then you can really control your cycle.
Wow.
And you'll have your period during the new moon, and then most fertile during those 3 days of the full moon. It's kind of interesting.
That's cool. I think that finishes my talk for tonight. Wow. Thanks for listening. Oh boy, yeah.
Okay, so you said that structures have mortality to it.
All structure is mortal.
Okay, so we're coming around, well, actually we're 2012 now.
Yeah.
Okay, and it seems like everything is coming down right now, but at the same time, because everything's coming down, and things like the NDAA passing, it seems like people are starting to awaken. So you said that if we ever want to traverse long distances, we have to transcend beyond conflict. And I'm guessing conflict is related to structure. Then what would the world be like when we transcend that kind of conflict that we're kind of in right now?
Well, like I said, I mean, if we're all living in our hearts, basically love, command, structure. Love, and what will happen is as structures start to fall apart, if you're living in your heart and love is running the show, love can basically guide those crumbling structures in the best way possible to recycle into something better. Yeah, if the mind is just attached to the structures, the mind is just going to freak out, lash out, and do all kinds of crazy stuff because it's trying to, support the structures from crumbling. So that's the whole key. That's why I said the biggest task for humanity is really get in touch with our hearts and live from that space and practice that yoga. And, put it this way, I know for myself personally that if push comes to shove, I'll personally surrender all structure for love. I've already come to that in my being. Most people haven't. Right? Most people are out there buying guns and ammo to try and protect their structures. Seriously. Last year was the biggest sale of guns in U.S. history.
December.
Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Why? Because the mind is afraid, right? The mind is attached to the structures. It's not going to run out with guns and try and protect all the structures.
Y2K.
Yeah. So, like I said, if we're living from our hearts and being the love that we are, as structures crumble, the love will be there to say, okay, it's time to release that, and it's time to redirect that and try and take those resources of those crumbling structures and build something better and new. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So the only question now is, what's the next step?
Well, I guess the next step is to, like I said, my only challenge to you is to practice living in your heart and do that daily yoga and share that with other people. And follow your heart, follow your purpose.
Well, that's easier said than done because...
That's right. Yeah, it is easier said than done.
Someone like me, I've been living head space my whole life. I'm a very intellectual person. And,
yeah, but you're also very young. You're lucky to have this information right now.
I feel fortunate.
Yeah.
I'm very grateful to be privy to this information because most people are not.
All the spiritual information I've shared tonight, I've been studying from my spiritual mentor, Glenda Green, for the last 12 years. I have her books. So if anybody wants to purchase the books, they're for sale here tonight. Also, for anybody interested who still has a cassette player, this is obsolete, I have 4 cassette tapes here that I'm just giving out for free for anybody who wants them. They're Glenda Green in the mid-90s did 14 ridiculously profound lectures after her experience, her mystical experience of Yeshua, Jesus, however you want to call him, materialized. She was a famous portraitist artist, and she had this mystical experience where he appeared and she painted what's now a world famous portrait of him. And during that time, she had conversations and took all these notes, those notes into lectures and books. So I've been studying her work for the last 12 years. So most of the information, besides my own personal experience in life, are coming from my study of her work. So this is her lecture number 2, which is the greatest lecture as an introduction to the body of this work. So yeah, anybody who wants it, you can have it.
Thank you.
Okay.
My car still runs on cassette player.
Yeah. Great. All right. Sure.
I just had a thought too. Is growing up all the way that we did in the world that we live in. you know, it's a common tendency, like when the bush gets kind of like ruffled up a little, we tend to back away from it. But what I find, at least I found for myself, is that when your belief systems and everything start to get scattered and you get confused because you learn some new information, anytime you make any kind of transformative decision or you get tuned on to some new information, things start shifting, right? So if you go with that and you kind of endure it a little, I think that then you reach the new like relationship and you invest so much in, like it's happened to me, I invested so much in a previous relationship. When it ended, I didn't know how to deal with that. I kept trying to go back and back and back until I came to that place where I realized there's no turning back, right? And then as I got out of that, endured it, I was led to my ultimate, what I'm supposed to be doing, which had nothing to do with that. But it still served me, but no, as I move forward, it no longer served me. So what I'm trying to say is like, when everything starts to get thrown up and down, and like, oh, what's going on? That's actually a good sign. Because if everything's just kind of going like this, then it's like, that's boring. Why? What? If we made a decision to come here to experience conflict and to kind of go through the 3D dimension and then progress through it for the entertainment of it all, then why would we want to do this? That's like, you go to the hospital, that's death. You want this, right? That's life.
It's interesting. Well, the soul incarnates to have all these physical 3D experiences. The soul comes in to like fall in love and experience hitting a home run and jumping out of an airplane.
Yeah.
The soul wants all these visceral, thrilling experiences. And the body is actually in conflict with that. The body wants to hear the harps of heaven. The body wants to be blissed out, just like. And so actually, this is a legacy that all humanity has to deal with, because we come in and we have these conflicts going on with our body and our soul, and eventually, as we mature in this life, the two finally hopefully come in to support each other. The body works to support the soul, and the soul works to support the body. But initially, they're actually in conflict. The bodies naturally want comfort, warm fire, and, just listen to the harps of heaven and just be blissed out. It doesn't want to jump into an ice cold ocean. The soul wants that. The soul wants to jump into an ice cold ocean and have that experience.
Once you do it, it's like...
Well, the body adapts fast, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's the soul that's after that experience, not the body.
Right. That's so true.
But eventually they come in and they start supporting each other, and finally they're in tune with each other. They're like, okay.
Thanks very much, Steve.
Yeah, I gave that. All right.
Thanks so much.